You already know what money is. You've had it in your pocket since you were old enough to hold it. You've spent it, saved it, worried about it, worked for it. But here's something almost nobody stops to ask. Before money existed, how did the world actually work? And how did a small metal disc or a polished shell convince an entire civilization it was worth anything at all? The answer reaches back further than coins, further than writing, further than civilization itself. And it says something deeply uncomfortable about the story you were probably taught in school. Most of us learned the same thing. Long ago, people bartered. You had fish, your neighbor had grain. So you traded. Simple, logical, a natural stepping stone toward currency. Eventually, barter became too complicated, so humans invented money to make things easier. The only problem is that anthropologists can't find any evidence that story actually happened. British anthropologist Caroline Humphrey spent decades studying societies that were supposed to be barter economies. She couldn't find a single one, not a historical example, not a living one. Anthropologist David Graeber, whose research at the London School of Economics spanned thousands of years of economic history, went further. He concluded that the barter first story wasn't just incomplete. It was almost entirely backwards. So if currency didn't evolve from barter, where did it actually come from? The real answer starts not with trade, but with something far more ancient: obligation. Picture a world before money, before writing, before cities. A small band of hunter-gatherers living together. Someone gets sick and can't hunt. The group feeds them anyway. When the hunt fails and one family has nothing, another family shares what they have. These aren't transactions, they're relationships, and they create something invisible but powerful: debt. Not debt in the modern financial sense, something older, a felt sense of owing, of balance being disrupted, of something given that has not yet been returned. Anthropologists studying traditional societies around the world have consistently found this web of mutual obligation, of gift and countergift, of favor remembered and favor repaid, came long before any formal system of exchange. In a group of 30 people, you didn't need coins or records. You remembered. You knew exactly who had shared their meat with you last winter. You knew whose child your family had sheltered during the flood season. All of that lived in memory, enforced not by law, but by something far older: reputation, the social cost of being known as the person who never gives back. This was the first economy. It worked well, right up until the moment groups grew large enough that you couldn't remember every face. The moment trade routes stretched far enough that you were dealing with strangers. The moment the web of personal memory snapped under the weight of scale. The first currency wasn't designed. It grew out of that exact breaking point. In Mesopotamia, what is now modern Iraq, archaeologists have unearthed clay tablets dating to around 3,200 BCE, some of the oldest written records ever found. And what are they recording? Not philosophy, not history. Debt. Quantities of barley owed. Amounts of silver promised. Deliveries expected at a future date. The earliest writing humans ever produced was essentially a receipt. Before people wrote stories or laws or prayers, they wrote down who owed what to whom. The need to track obligation was so urgent and so fundamental that it drove the invention of writing itself. Researcher Michael Kuipers at Leiden University examined over 5,000 Bronze Age rings and axe blades from prehistoric Central Europe. Roughly 70% of the rings clustered around an identical weight, approximately 195 grams, far too consistent to be accidental. These weren't decorations. They were standardized objects, designed to be weighed, exchanged, and recognized as equivalent. Commodity money, emerging independently in Central Europe thousands of years before coins existed. The same pattern appeared across the world. In ancient China, cowrie shells were used as currency for over 3,000 years. Not because cowrie shells were useful. They weren't food or tools. They were chosen precisely because they were rare, beautiful, hard to fake, and easy to count. Objects that couldn't be produced in bulk became the first reliable stores of value. And that is the key insight most people miss. Currency was never really about convenience. It was about trust. The problem with obligation in a small band of people is that everyone knows everyone. The web of debt stays manageable because the community stays small. But as human groups grew larger, as trade routes stretched across hundreds of miles, as strangers began doing business with other strangers, that personal web broke down. You can't rely on memory and relationship when you're trading with someone you've never met and will never see again. You need something else. An object that both of you already agree has value, that can cross the gap between strangers and carry trust with it. That is what currency actually is. Not a substitute for barter. Not a convenience tool. It is a technology for extending trust between people who don't know each other. The Mesopotamian shekel, one of the earliest formalized currency units, was not a coin. It was a specific weight of barley or silver, weighed out every time. The records of those weights, carved into clay, verified by official seals, authenticated by scribes, were what made the whole system work. The currency wasn't just the object. It was the entire surrounding system of record-keeping and institutional backing that gave the object meaning. The first coins didn't appear until around 650 BCE in Lydia, in what is now Western Turkey. The elites of Lydia and Ionia used them for a specific reason. They needed to pay armies. Paying thousands of soldiers in weighed silver every week required something faster, more portable, and harder to dispute than a clay tablet. Coins solved that problem. That means the coin, the thing most people picture when they think of ancient money, wasn't the beginning of currency. It was currency refined, standardized, and built for state power. Long before any king stamped his face onto metal, ordinary people were already exchanging shells, bronze rings, cacao beans, and weighed silver in ways that carried agreed value across distance and time. The deeper you look, the more you see that money was never one invention. It was thousands of inventions, emerging independently across every continent, each time people faced the same ancient problem. How do you move obligation across space and time? How do you make a stranger trust you? The specific objects changed. Shells became silver. Silver became coins. Coins became paper. Paper became digits in a computer. But the underlying problem has never changed since the first human handed something to another human and expected something in return. Right now, the money in your bank account is not backed by gold. It's backed by something far more ancient and far more fragile. The collective agreement of millions of people who all agree to believe it has value. Strip that agreement away, as history has shown can happen, and the number on your screen becomes as meaningless as a cowrie shell in a world that no longer recognizes it. The cowrie shell was real. The bronze ring was real. The clay tablet was real. What made them money was never the object. It was always the agreement. And that agreement, that shared human willingness to treat a thing as having value because everyone else does too, is one of the most powerful and most fragile things your species has ever built. You carry it in your pocket every single day without thinking twice. Consider what that actually means. Every economic system ever built, from the clay tablet records of Mesopotamia to the digital numbers in your bank account right now, rests on the same foundation. Not gold, not law, not military force, though all of those things have reinforced it at various times. At its deepest level, every currency ever created rests on the willingness of enough people to act as though it has value. That willingness is not guaranteed. It has to be earned, maintained, and renewed by every generation that inherits it. Empires have collapsed not because their armies lost, but because their currencies did. Because the agreement broke. Because enough people stopped believing at the same time. Your ancestors built something extraordinary when they first assigned value to an object that had no nutritional value, no practical function, no intrinsic worth of any kind. and convince their community to accept it in exchange for real labor and real goods. That leap, from concrete reality to shared abstraction, is one of the most remarkable things any animal on this planet has ever done. So the next time you tap your card or hand over a note and walk away with something in return, pause for just a second. What just happened wasn't simply a financial transaction. It was the latest moment in a story that started around a campfire, with a sick hunter who couldn't feed himself, and a group of people who fed him anyway and trusted that one day the balance would come back around. The technology has changed beyond recognition. The instinct underneath it has not moved an inch.